Hello, I'm going to do my presentation on how to win the Stanley Cup. Just a quick overview. The question I'm researching is what factors in the regular season contribute to NHL teams not only making the playoffs, but also being able to win the Stanley Cup. Of course, the playoffs are right around the corner coming up in April, so I'm eager to look at what factors play into how does the team not only get into the dance, but make it all the way and hoist the trophy. I'm going to be observing data from the salary cap era, which is from the year 2006 to the present, as seen with the champions of that year, the 2006 Carolina Hurricanes. The NHL stopped in 2005 because of a lockout. They didn't have a season that year. So since then, they made changes, and those changes have all been the same in terms of how teams acquire points throughout the regular season and stuff like that. So I decided to do it in that data frame. First, I started with cleaning the data for a data frame named NHL Stats. I got all of my data from hockeyreference.com. That includes team data and player data that we'll see later on. As you can see, here's the table that we started with. First, I decided to rename some columns with non-letters and names, such as points percentage that had a percentage sign instead of the actual word percent or an abbreviation, as I decided to change it to, just to clean up so it'll be easier to call on those columns later on. Next, I decided to rank teams in each category that I decided that I wanted to look at later on, those being goals for, goals allowed, save percentage, power play percentage, and penalty kill percentage, each by season. So, and then I was able to rank each of those teams. So each stat that you see a team, such as this first one, the Anaheim Ducks, they were 31st in power play percentage rank and penalty kill percentage for that matter, but they will stay or that will be the number that shows up instead of, 547 or whatever it is. As you can see, there's 548 rows, but that's the observation that would show up. Then I created three columns based on the footnotes from hockeyreference.com. A couple of them I added myself just to make it consistent, but the asterisks were already there. Those were teams that made the playoffs. A hashtag or a pound sign for a team that won the President's Trophy, and a plus sign for a team that won the Stanley Cup Trophy, and then rename that first column from rank, abbreviated RK, to season rank, so you can see how a team ranked each season in their season compared to other teams. And then lastly, decided to take off the footnotes, the asterisk, the pound sign, and the plus sign, as you can see compared to the Winnipeg Jets here at the bottom. They have the asterisks. Those are all teams made the playoffs. Those observations now do not have that, but they have a column that will say they made the playoffs shown in this code right here. I decided to make three of the data frames that I mentioned. One is a team that made the playoffs, or all the teams that made the playoffs. The second are teams that won the President's Trophy, and then third are the teams that won the Stanley Cup. All done the exact same way based on the data that was already given to us. So what does it take to actually make the playoffs? Well, for starters, I wanted to look at a histogram, or three histograms, two shown here, dealing with all teams that made the playoffs. Obviously, the first one is every team in the salary cap era every year, how many points they accumulated. And then the bottom is all the teams that have made the playoffs in those years. The most playoff teams you see are going to accumulate right around 100 points. Obviously, that's the majority of teams are going to be closer to 100. Obviously, teams are going to have a lot more. You see even one team down there at 130, 135, the Boston Bruins had last year. But you can see that playoff data is a little bit skewed to the left, and I'll get to that in a moment. For teams that win the Stanley Cup, 18 champions since 2006, decided to create another histogram to look at that. 89% of the champions in the salary cap era earned at least 90 points. As you can see, most of them are going towards 100, and even 110 at some points. 66% earned at least 100 points in the regular season. Now, if you can see those two on the left, you think it'd be odd that the team would score less than 80 points, and there's a gap between 80 and 90. So what are those two outliers that we see? Those two outliers are two of the champions that scored less than 80 points, those being the 2013 Chicago Blackhawks and the 2021 Tampa Bay Lightning. The 2013 Chicago Blackhawks had a shortened season of only 48 games due to a player lockout, similar to that of the 2005 lockout, but this did not cancel the season. So the Blackhawks won the President's Trophy, but only scored 77 points. And then 2021, the Tampa Bay Lightning had a shortened COVID season that they only played 56 games in the regular season and they scored 75 points. Only two of the champions in the salary cap era also won the President's Trophy. One of them being the 2013 Chicago Blackhawks, and the other being my favorite team, the 2008 Detroit Red Wings. So if you look at it in a certain way, the 2008 Detroit Red Wings were the last team to play in a full 82 game season and win the President's Trophy. The Blackhawks did not play as far or play as many games. So that's why I didn't want to use President's Trophy for any of the stats, and also determined why I don't want to use points going forward in this study. Then I wanted to look at how do you actually get to win games in the NHL? It's pretty simple. Score goals and don't let the other team score, right? That's pretty much what I went with in my determination. I wanted to look at each team's goals for, goals allowed, save percentage, power play percentage, and penalty kill percentage, because those are very critical parts of the game. Obviously, you don't want to give up goals and stuff, but special teams are a huge part of hockey with power play and penalty kill. I also decided to change from points to points percentage. Points percentage is simply the amount of points that you scored out of the total that you could have gotten for winning games in the NHL. 82 game season, 2 points per win, 164 points are available, and your percentage is based on how many points you scored out of 164 for an 82 game season, but also helps for shortened seasons like 2013, 2021, etc. As you can see here, all of the correlations on the left are positive except for goals allowed, which would make sense because if you give up less goals to a team, they're not going to beat you as often. So that means the win percentage goes up, or the points percentage in this case goes up, the less goals you give up. So everything else was positive except for that one. Then I wanted to look at the average rankings for each team in each season to see how that fares and overall looks overall compared to the rest of the season. I may do data frames to observe the average rankings. As you can see here, average playoff team rankings and then average cup winners rankings. And that'll be shown here on the next slide. So on the left, you can see each year combined all the teams together, and that is the average rank for every playoff team that played. Also added average age just to see if there was any real difference between that for making the playoffs and not. Pretty much very similar, off by maybe a tenth of a decimal point, which isn't real. That's what, a month or a couple weeks. So I don't think it really affected it that much. Points percentage wise, you see on the left, 0.625 for the general team to make the playoffs. That calculates out to about 102, 103 points if you are playing a full 82 game season. And then on the right, 0.659, that's about 108 points. So obviously a little bit more for a team to win Stanley Cup. Also could have been a little bit heavy down, obviously, with Chicago and Tampa having less points to win the cup in those years. And the same goes for the other playoff years for the whole teams. And then you can see the average rank. Most of the teams that make the playoffs, average rank consists of about pretty much top 10, fringe top 10 teams. And then as you get into the champions, it goes up quite significantly for most, except for, interestingly enough, power play percentage goes down by a half point in terms of ranking. Everything else enters into the top 10 or further into the top 10, except for that one. Ultimately, if you look at the data, all 18 champions were at least in the top 10 in one category. Two teams that made it into the top 10 in only one category, the 2006 Carolina Hurricanes, were number 3 in goals for, nothing else. And then the 2023 Vegas Golden Knights, the most recent champion, were 7th in save percentage and not top 10 anything else. They were close with 11th in goals allowed, in the goals allowed ranking, but everybody else at least 2 or more. But yeah, so everybody in the top 10, or at least one in the top 10, that's a critical point to make for this. And then lastly, I wanted to see how individual skaters and goalies, all players, correlated to this. So I decided to add in a couple of more CSV files for skaters and goalies to separate the two, clean them up a little bit to make sure they were easily able to read them, and then shorten them up here, as you can see in the bottom left and middle. Each player had, for the skaters, you had each season, the points they accumulated for, so that's goals and assists, and how they ranked for that season. And I kept the top 20 for each of those seasons. So the lowest you're going to see is 20 for a season. And then for goalies, I took all of the goalies and then filtered out goalies that played 10 games or less, because some of these guys came in with, one game, had one save or two saves, and that's a 100% save rate, but that doesn't really show you how good that goalie was that year. And then the last thing, I wanted to take a look at impact players. So I looked just specifically at the teams that ranked number one in goals for and goals allowed in those 18 seasons for the Stanley Cup champions. For goals scored, it was the Pittsburgh Penguins in 2017, and then the Tampa Bay Lightning in 2020 in the COVID year, or before the full COVID year, I should say. And then for teams that were number one in goals allowed, you had the Detroit Red Wings in 2008, the Chicago Blackhawks in 2013, and then the 2014 Los Angeles Kings. A lot of these guys had impact players. I like the Los Angeles Kings, who were in the very bottom of goals for, but were at the top of goals allowed. A lot of that due to their goaltenders, one of them being Jonathan Quick. And for goals scored, the Penguins, as you can see in the bottom right, looked a deeper dive into that team. They had 3 goal scorers in the top 20. Sidney Crosby, the most points out of the bunch, and then Evgeny Malkin and Phil Kessel not far behind. Impact players are important in terms of goalies and skaters, but sometimes things go unnoticed, like the 2008 Detroit Red Wings. Yes, they had 2 very good goalies in Chris Osgood and future Hall of Famer, or current Hall of Famer, Dominik Hasek, future Hall of Famer at the time. But you have guys like Nicholas Lidstrom, who's one of the greatest defensemen of all time. Sometimes those statistics for defensemen don't show up as much, and that's why goals allowed is a little bit different than save percentage. So in conclusion, to make the playoffs in the NHL, the team's got to shoot for 100 points. 100 points is almost a guarantee to make it in. No team has ever missed the playoffs with 100 points in the regular season. 90 points is pretty shaky. Some teams have missed with 90 points, even as high as 96 at one time or a few times. But for the most part, you're going to get in with 100 points or more. Now, to win the Stanley Cup, points aren't just everything. You need to be good in one of those 5 statistics we were talking about. Uh, NHL goals for, goals allowed, save percentage, power play percentage, or penalty kill. Doesn't need, it would help to be good at more than one, obviously, but we've seen that champions in the past have been good at just one of those 5, and they've still won the cup. So you have to be in the top 10 at least one of those. And obviously, having an impact player will never hurt you. It's going to help you more often than it doesn't. But it's not impossible to win the Stanley Cup without an impact player. The 2006 Hurricanes, as I've mentioned before, they were number 3 in scoring that year in goals, but they did not have a top 20 goal scorer or a top 20 points accumulator for one of their skaters. So it is a team sport overall, but having an impact player is not the end all be all. Thank you for watching this presentation. I appreciate it.